Josephine, thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed. It's really great to have you here. I know you no longer work in the field of audiovisual translation, so this is even more appreciated. But back in the 1990s, I think your name, was one of the most prominent names of the people who were working in the field. And I was hoping we could go back in time a little bit and talk a little bit about the beginnings of ESIST, the mood around audiovisual translation in 1990s, and your book and your research as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so perhaps let's start with ESIST. So in early 1996, I believe, you were instrumental, together with a number of other colleagues, such as Professor Yves Gambier or Mary Carroll, in establishing the European Association for Studies in Screen Translation. Could you tell us what you remember? What was your motivation behind doing this? Anything really?
Yeah, so it was really attached to my job at the European Institute for the Media. And I started working there in 93, I think, on this very topic. And in my memory, the research itself lasted only maybe a bit less than 2 years, so not longer until the end of 94, beginning of 95, but we continue to have these sessions at the annual conference of this institute. And of course, I built up a network of experts in this field because it was my first job, and I was sent around Europe to interview many people, and there was no Zoom, so that was lucky for me because I could travel, to all these places and find out more about possibilities to strengthen the European audiovisual market by sort of counting with the subtitling, or with the translation of these audiovisual productions in a later stage, so that the internal audiovisual market within Europe would be stronger and more productions would be shown between the countries, and to sort of counterpart the American tsunami of productions that came into. And because at that time you also had, the commercial television was getting quite big, was growing fast, and money and budgets for production were under pressure. So it was much cheaper to buy cheap content from America than sometimes larger productions from other European countries. And
right. So it was at the.
So when ESIST was found, I think I must have worked on other topics, on a day-to-day basis. But through the whole period, I worked there until 97, beginning of 97, I think. That whole time I've been involved with the subject mainly because of the contacts, and there was some continued research by others, not from the institute, but and I had this annual meeting of the group at this conference that the EIM organized all over Europe every year in a different spot. And there again I met Yves and Mary.
Are you referring to this conference in Strasbourg in 1995 as well?
I don't recall that, to be honest, no. But as I said to you earlier, I mainly remember the non-formal parts of the agenda at these conferences.
Okay, so could you tell us what they were?
The castles and the bars. And I mean, I was 25 or something by then, so we had some very good fun at great places.
And you established ESIST.
That sort of got stuck in my memory, and not the official parts.
Yes, but so ESIST was established in the meantime, so to speak, right?
I remember we went to the castle because I'd been in Cardiff 2 years ago with my family for a holiday, and we went to Cardiff castle, and I thought, yeah, we've been here. I've been here. So I remember that. But
Did you
it
sign
was
the
somewhere in
memorandum in
winter.
the
When was
castle?
it? Was it in winter that it
I
was
think the
founded?
documents, I think the document says January 1996, and then
it was dark, lousy weather.
yeah, but it wasn't signed in the castle, was it?
I don't remember that. Where must have been in a hotel or something. I think we were in a hotel very close to the castle.
And do you remember the mood of that time? Like, what were you trying to achieve in terms of audiovisual translation, dubbing, subtitling?
Well, in general, it was sort of a subtopic. You know, it was never on top of the list when it was to language research. And subtitling was not considered as real translation. You know, the translation of literature, that was the highest standard for translator to achieve, I guess. And television didn't have such high esteem in that sense, I think. And though the people who practiced it really did consider it as a real profession and had had qualifications for good subtitling and not so good subtitling. And of course, I mean, when I did the research project, I didn't have a lot of literature to look into. There was Jan Iversson's book, which was sort of a Bible. And then there was this publication that the European Institute for the Media did before I came, which was a bit broader, also on it was a German guy, I don't remember his name now, but it was a real big, thick book. And the foundation, the European Culture Foundation, that commissioned this research to the Institute again in 93, wanted to sort of follow up on that previous book. But in research that was, as I remember it, most of it, I didn't have a lot of material. I really had to get bits and bobs from audiovisual research bureaus. And
perhaps we could talk a little bit about this research, because I think this is like one of the earliest research studies on audience preferences regarding dubbing and subtitling and voiceover. And it was conducted, right, as part of your work for the European Institute for the Media. I have, because I didn't manage to read your book, Dubbing and Subtitling Guidelines for Production and Distribution. I didn't manage to get hold of that, I have to say, but I did read this paper that was published in 1995 in Sequentia, Breaking Eastern European Barriers. And I think the result of the study in terms of audiovisual translation preferences in Eastern Europe at that time was that voiceover was preferred by 41% people, then subtitling 23%, and dubbing 29%. So subtitling was the least popular. Do you remember anything about the study?
Well, I think for most of it, it was a lot decided then by the budget. What could be done? I mean, obviously, the audiovisual industry understood that a good dubbing or a good subtitle would make a better translation, but the amount of films coming in from across the ocean was that fast, and they wanted to show them. Meant that also they had to make very quick translations, and so that sometimes people were simply forced to watch a movie with a voiceover. And actually, when I worked at the Institute, we went on a holiday, me and my boyfriend and now husband. Yes, people, I am still with my boyfriend from then, still married.
Well done. Congratulations.
But, yeah. Just for the gossip part of all the interviews then maybe. So we actually went to the Baltic states for a holiday, and we ended up at some train station. We had to wait a couple of hours for the connecting train, and we watched in the kiosk, we watched Speed, this movie with Russian voiceover for just one voice for all the characters in the film. there, and it was very interesting. Also, with my background in this research, I thought, okay, so this is really what it looks like.
Yes, you
But
had a hands-on experience in that.
I guess the audience would have preferred something else, but that was all they were offered at that time.
So you're saying they chose, or they said they prefer voiceover because this is what they were used to.
Yeah. So, and I remember that it was difficult to get the figures straight. So maybe, I'm not sure if it was 41% which was voiceover, or that it really was the audience preference. But well, it says here that it was the audience preference, doesn't it? So.
And in the paper, you say that research on audience preferences have never been carried out so far, right? So it only shows how important your study was. And then it says that voiceover is seen as a too simple way of getting the message across because the viewer simply gets the dialogue read with the moving images. And so language transfer using this method can no longer maintain or do justice to the quality of the original version. And I think that sort of reflects the common perception of voiceover in the Western world. Would you say?
I think so, yeah. And actually, at that time, and still in most subtitling countries, like the northern countries and the Netherlands as well, most people consider dubbing just as bad. You know, they would find it terrible to watch a dubbed film not with the original voices, so to say. So.
So what were you trying to achieve with your research and with your book? Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about your book, because it's called Guidelines. So were you trying to promote quality?
A book is a lot. I don't have it here. I have to look it up. It's still somewhere in my archives, I suppose. But it wasn't a big book. It really is a small booklet. Maybe that's the proper name, with very practical guidelines for people in audiovisual production. If you write a script, then what can you do beforehand to make the border easier afterwards? And I remember that it was, for instance, about names of the main characters. For instance, there's a Dutch female name. I remember that's in the book as well, that there's a Dutch female name which is called Joke. You pronounce it in Dutch as Joke, but you spell it as joke. And obviously, if you translate that to English and people write, well, that woman is called Joke, you know, that's a bit weird. Or, well, there are other examples in all languages for that. If you translate a name, then sometimes in another language it's something very funny, or, you know, not at all what you want to achieve with characterizing a person in that production. So yeah, that was one of the examples. And by doing all the interviews and the research, I sort of collected all these guidelines, or sort of, yeah, tips and tricks for production people to take into account that when eventually the production will travel across Europe, what will make it, sort of easier to translate it.
Right. And did you find, I'm wondering, did you find a lot of variation between different countries? Because if you're trying to produce guidelines, I suppose that's what's going to be an issue, right? That one country is doing something in one way and another country in another way.
Yeah, I would have to read it again to sort of recall what all the guidelines were, but it was also a lot, of course, when dubbing, the sound was sometimes, I remember they did not get the, well, I lost a bit the jargon of all this, but with a film you get, you know, the sound in a different track. And it sometimes was in one track, and if they had to do a dub, that would mean they had to reproduce all the sound effects as well. So they had to do every car door slam and every explosion. They had to bring it back into the soundtrack.
Oh, right.
And
yeah,
that's a lot of work and very expensive, obviously. So it was also, very simple simple tips about if you send a film across the border, make sure you send the separate sound tracks, like for the voices, for the music, for the sound effects, all separately, so that they can easily be separated from the voices, and then they would only have to do the voices, which of course is a lot less work than if they would have to do all the sounds again.
Yes, and the technology was different back then, right?
Very different, yes. So now that is much easier, but then yes, of course, the technology was not digital at all. Yeah.
So looking back, what would you say, what has changed in audiovisual translation? How has it evolved, and how do you see its future?
Oh boy, well, as I said, I've never worked in the topic since I left the institute in Düsseldorf back then, but I noticed that yeah, a lot of the companies that were some of them were quite big then and had a big reputation, that they had to deal with a lot of competition from other companies that would do it a lot faster, quicker, for lower prices, that it became a very competitive business. As I said, because there were more and more TV channels coming up that had to show very cheap production, and translation was simply something, oh yeah, well, we have to do that as well, and let's do a quick job, and then it's done across. And well, nowadays with all the downloading, there's a whole culture of illegal translation or illegal subtitling of movies with I am surprised that how fast a movie can be downloaded with Dutch subtitles, and these people, they have a nickname and they simply I think they do a lot of it almost automatically, because it's sometimes a very, very bad job, but they get away with it, nobody really is going after them, and it supports.
Yes, and perhaps machine translation is
yes,
used in some cases.
It looks
as well.
like they do some of it by machine translation even. So that has changed a lot, I think. But I did not follow at all the business afterwards, or
only as a viewer, I suppose.
Only
as a viewer.
As a viewer, yes, of course I did.
Cinema goer, television viewer, yes, Netflix perhaps.
Yes. And then still, then I was born and raised in the Netherlands, which is a subtitling country, and I very much prefer that. Though I do notice that my children now, they grow up with a lot of English, a lot more even than what I grew up with. And they watch a lot of movies just in the original language, and they put on the subtitling for hard of hearing just for support.
Not Dutch subtitles, but
no,
English
Dutch.
to English.
Yeah, they just put the English on, and then they watch it.
All right, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed, and good luck with your other career,
Okay.
non-audiovisual translation related, right?
I'll just say hello then to everyone. I did remember your names after some digging, but Agnieszka helped me a lot with that as well. But hope everyone is in good health, especially these days.